Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Career Change Champions podcast. I'm your host, Tonya Montella, and I'm here with Lia Biscardi. Lia, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
I appreciate you being here in general, but more so because I know you've had a pretty crazy day. So I'm more so than ever appreciate you for taking the time out to chat. For those listening, Lia is an adventurer at heart and embraces life with absolutely no regrets. Building others up while challenging herself to learn new skills, are just a couple of her life goals. During her former life as a teacher, she taught life skills to youth, equipping them with the skills necessary to become successful adults. As she transitioned out of education, her photography and educational background allowed her to tackle any challenge that's been handed to her. And that is the part that I absolutely love. So I was so excited to talk to you today, of course, and you and I have spoken before. Actually, do you want to, so background story, Lee and I met through a podcast collaboration group, and we actually did a swap. So Leah, do you want to share the name of your podcast in case folks are interested?
Sure. My podcast name is called Adding Chrome to Your Community, and it's on all podcast platforms and now starting on YouTube.
Awesome. Yeah. And actually haven't mentioned that in any episodes before. If folks that are listening are actually interested in watching us talk and seeing our faces and our smiles, this is actually available on YouTube as well, just under the Career Change Champions podcast name, if you want to check that out. So now that that's out of the way, I'm so excited to talk about your career change journey. Tell me about your former teaching career. How did you realize that's what you wanted to do at the time that you started it?
So that goes back to when I was little. I was 5 years old and I have a younger brother. He's 3 years younger than me. And I kind of was his second mom. He still calls me mom sometimes because I used to yell at him all the time. But when I was younger, I used to babysit all the neighborhood kids because I was one of the older ones. And my mom saw in me that I was really good with working with other kids and helping them with their homework. So she's like, oh, you would be a great teacher. So obviously, when you're 5 years old, you want to be like a Barbie or a fashion star or NFL football player. You don't think about actual careers that really matter. But as I got up in my school ages, so once I went from elementary school to middle school, people started recognizing those skills. And they said you'd be a really good teacher. So the more people that said it, the more it stuck. And I kind of just said, every time someone asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? A teacher.
Oh, I love that. So I assume that's what you went to school for, or did you kind of go into it organically? How did that happen?
Yes, ma'am. I went to school for it. When I hit ninth grade, I went to school in New York. So you have to kind of pick your subject of choice. So I didn't want to work with the younger generation. So like elementary school, I really wanted to work with middle school and high school just because I felt more connected to that. And that's when I felt passionate about things. So when you're so young, you just love everything or hate everything. There's nothing in between. But as you get older, you kind of mold yourself with the people around you. And we had to decide what we wanted to teach. And I love history. I'm a history buff, but I wanted to challenge myself. And so I went to school for biochemistry and adolescent education, 7 through 12. So my mom always taught me to have a backup plan. So just in case I didn't want to teach anymore, I would have that science degree background as well.
That's so interesting. Okay, so you were teaching middle schoolers science, is that right?
Middle school and high school. So I taught high school for about 5 years and then middle school for about a year and a half.
Wow. Okay. The high schoolers, I'm just envisioning what that's like. What did you love most about teaching? I'm sure there's a number of things you might want to share, but what comes top of mind when I say that?
The kids. So I always tell this story. When I first started living on my own, I would go to the grocery store and just, meal prep for the week. As a teacher, you don't have a lot of time to yourself. So when you have that chance, you do your adult things, chores around the house and do what you need to do. And every time I go to the grocery store and someone walks up to me And they start a conversation and they'll be like, oh, so how many kids do you have? And I always jokingly tell them 120 because I treat my students like my own children. So I ask them about their day every time they come in the room. And if they're in a really bad mood, I know exactly how to help them. When you teach, you really have to learn how they think. And each kid is so different. So even though you can have 25 boys in a room, they're all the same age, they don't look alike, they don't act alike, nothing is the same. So you have to treat every kid differently. And it's the same thing with your own children, because every child is totally different. So even to this day, I miss that aspect of coming into the classroom and them saying, Miss B, guess what I did this weekend? Or Miss B, look what I drew. And it's like, yes, these are middle school and high schoolers that are still saying, hey, Miss B, look what I drew. So
Aww.
I miss that aspect of getting to know the kids and watching them grow. Like, especially middle schoolers, you watch them go on to high school and then graduate and then college. And I still run into kids that I've taught to this day, and knowing they're married and have kids. And it's just like, oh my God, I taught that child. I mean, that adult. So it's the kids. Like, teaching, everyone will say it. If you are passionate about teaching, the absolute reason you go into teaching is for the kids, nothing else. You don't get paid a lot, so you can't say it's the money. You can't say you get any really good benefits, because summer vacation is not really summer vacation. So the best part of teaching is the kids and getting to know them.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I can imagine. And I love what you said there about, being a teacher, you have to learn. Because for me personally, I have a learning and development background, being a trainer, facilitator, instructional designer, all those different roles that go within that. And you're absolutely right. Like, truly understanding your audience is so key. And there's a phrase that my husband always says, something about sharpening a sword. I don't know. I wish I could tell it now, but he talks about that a lot. He's in a very different field, so that's neither here nor there. But that stood out to me when you said that, because it's so true. Now, you mentioned, having this be what you went to school for. So I know that you started teaching out of college. How long did you actually teach for?
So I taught for 7 years. So I started in 2015, but I actually started while I was in college still. So my actual internship was paid. So I kind of call it a half a year, but technically I taught from 2015 to 2021.
Got it. Okay. So let's talk about that, because we know what was happening around 2021. What made you, and I know this is a loaded question, so feel free to go wherever you would like to go with this, but what made you decide to get out of teaching?
So I think the best way to answer this question, especially to be helpful to anyone listening this, because everyone's experience is different, but you are who you are. So when you wake up in the morning, you either can be super happy, super cheerful, or a zombie, or you can just love your life no matter what happens throughout the day. And I think what really sets everything in motion is knowing what you're going to do that day. So starting early in 2020, even before the pandemic, I really started getting up in the morning and saying, I really don't want to go to work today. And I mean, everyone says that once in a while, like if you had a bad night of sleep or the kids kept you up and you just are really stressed out at work, you say that, like, I really don't want to go to work today. But then when it keeps continuing, and that's your ultimate mindset every single day, dreading going to work, you have two choices. You can either live that life the rest of your life, which sounds miserable, or you can give it up and pivot. So instead of saying changing careers, I like to say I pivoted, because what I went from was educating the youth to now educating adults. So I just pivoted where I was going. So a lot of people said, well, the pandemic probably killed you. And I go, yes, the pandemic killed me, but it started before that. It just added gasoline to the fire. And I think people don't realize that teachers have burnout. So burnout usually happens around year 3 of teaching. Your first year is always your hardest. Your second year is a little easier, but by your third year, you're either severely burnt out or just ready to chug along. And I was severely burnt out. You work 12 to 18-hour days. You're always thinking about your students outside of the classroom. I work in low income school districts, so kids come from all different types of backgrounds. So you're worrying about them at home. I've taught kids who had kids. I've taught kids who have lost a lot of family members and relatives, and need to go through the grieving process. I've taught kids who've been in jail. So you really take on their burdens. And I think people don't realize that changes your mindset. Like for me, instead of saying, I can help this child, I started saying, but is this really worth it for me? So I got a little selfish, but you have to remember, I was 24 years old, looking at everyone else that was 24 years old, living their life, having fun. And I was already there acting like I was a 50-year-old woman who's been in a career for 30 years. So for me, the biggest change was my mindset, waking up every morning and being miserable. And I did not want to be miserable. And so what I did was I changed where I taught. So maybe that would help. And then the pandemic hit. So that was like, okay, there goes that experiment. So I think that pivot really had to happen. It was just meant to be.
Yeah. And I like how you phrased it because, a lot of times when we talk about career change, for a lot of people, it can feel so big and so overwhelming. And I think it's hard for them to think about how they can take the skills that they've acquired, throughout their journey so far and transition, or like you said, pivot that into something that is transferable, but maybe just a little bit different, something that they've always had an interest in, or something that, they've always wanted to do, and they can take those skills and move it over to a different role. So I like how you say pivot, because you did exactly that. You took what you were doing, you just did it for a different audience.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So, so talk to me about, so you mentioned you changed where you were teaching, which I hear that a lot. I hear, people feeling like what they're doing is not what they want to be doing for one reason or another. They're having those types of feelings that you just described. And so what they attempt to do at first is just try and make a tweak. So maybe it's, for some people in corporate, maybe it's, looking for a different role within their same team, or moving to a different team at that same company, or doing the same role, but at a completely different company.
Yes.
So the first step is typically, I notice that people try and make a tweak or two to try and solve for what they're feeling. But then that ultimately leads them to a larger pivot, so to speak. So when you said you changed where you were teaching and then the pandemic hit and that really kind of like sparked it all, can you talk a little bit more, if you're willing to, about that and what that means?
Of course. So I was teaching 9th through 12th, two different types of sciences at a high school. And that was the second high school I actually taught at. The first year of teaching, I taught at a school, but I was commuting. So commuting's a whole nother ballgame. But I didn't have support like I wanted to. So in teaching, there's three things that you really have to have for a good, solid environment. So the first thing is you have to have a connection with your students. You have to know who they are, what makes them tick, all of that. So once you have that down, you're golden. The second part is having a supportive administration. So your assistant principals, your principals. And then the third is having a teacher buddy or teacher team. So if you're having a rough day or you have a problem in your classroom and you need help working through it, those are the people you go to. And I had number 1 and number 3, but I didn't have number 2. So that also made it miserable because, for example, in my classroom, I had a student that truly hated me. And the reason I say that is because of his home life. But every time he'd walk into my classroom, he acted up. I tried different motivating tactics, like giving him cell phone time or telling him he could work in a different location, tried candy and snacks. Now, mind you, he's a junior in high school. So, but you have to try everything. And typically after you have tried everything, you go to your team buddy, you try those aspects. And then if those don't work, then you bring in administration. And typically administration would side with the teacher, depending on the circumstance, and help support the child. I'm not saying taking sides, but help us work through it.
Mhm.
Most of the administration always took the kids' side and said we were doing something wrong. So that took our credibility away.
Mhm.
And when you change schools, you have to do the same thing all over. You have to learn how to do relationships or learn how your kids tick. You have to get to know your teen buddies and then get to know your administration. And I also changed from high school to middle school thinking that maybe I would be better with a younger crowd. So I taught 8th grade instead of juniors and seniors. So hopefully that helped. That was helping. And then the pandemic hit. So that just, the struggle of the pandemic was the aspect that science cannot be taught virtually for kids who are hands-on. So I'm a hands-on learner. So if you were to tell me your address right now, I cannot just listen to what you say, remember it. I have to physically write it down right then and there. And you have to write it on the screen for me so I can see it because I'm a visual person. Students who are visual, which you know them right away, the artistic type, they're the type that are constantly moving around a classroom. They cannot sit in front of Zoom for 8 hours a day and expect them to retain any information. So that was the toughest part as a teacher who was a visual learner to teach visual learners. That was the biggest struggle for me. And I just knew that that's not how I could do it. I knew that the kids couldn't handle it. And when you don't have yourself together, the kids know. You start going crazy, they start going crazy.
Got it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm certain that there's so many teachers, former teachers that are listening to what you're saying and can totally relate. I can only imagine all the different, I mean, teachers have had, a challenging, I would say, task of teaching children for so long, but the pandemic, I mean, and my son wasn't even school aged. So I can't even tell you what that was like. From a teacher's perspective, especially, I can only imagine and only empathize because I haven't gone through it myself. So, yeah, I think you're speaking to a lot of people's hearts here. So I appreciate you sharing that was your experience. Now, when it comes to pivoting to educating adults and photography, talk me through how you came to that conclusion that was what you wanted to do next.
So that was, it was kind of like, I always think of the peg game when you're little, like you have all these all these different shapes and you got to put them in the holes. And if they don't fit, the kid has to try again to find the hole that it puts in it. I feel like I'm that perfect combination. So when I switched from teaching science to switching to photography, it just fit because, throughout my childhood, I've always been the creative one in the family. So like anytime it was someone's birthday, I would be making a birthday banner and drawing all over it. I used to take art classes after school to keep me busy. I absolutely sucked at sports, but I was still in sports for the social part of it. But I always begged my mom, like, can I go to art camp? Can I go this? So I was always creative. So when I was, I think 10, my parents decided to buy me a DSLR camera, like a professional looking camera. And it wasn't cheap, but it was like the cheapest version because obviously you're not going to buy a 10-year-old a really expensive thing. But and then I just started taking pictures. So we would go on vacation. I would take pictures of animals and my family members, and everyone just knew me as the family photographer. So as I grew up, I also grew my love of photography. I would take classes in middle school and high school, like because they would offer them as part of like to get credit. So I'm like, okay, cool, I love this thing, might as well take this class. And I would watch YouTube videos when YouTube was real big, first coming out, I guess. Not real big, it is still big, but I would talk to all these different people about photography, and no one in my family was ever big in photography, so I kind of self-taught. But once I realized that I didn't want to teach anymore, I said, oh crap, what am I going to do? And selling my photography was an option, but it's a starving artist thing. Unless you like are randomly viral, you don't make a lot of money off of selling photography. So I was like, okay, well, how do I take these two passions and put them together? So that's how I started the term photo marketing. So I'm a photo marketer, which means I take pictures and then help people with the marketing aspect, which is hard to find. And then it just happened to happen that the pandemic happened. So I was like, okay, more people need photo marketing skills because they're going from brick and mortar to online. So it just clicked. It was just like, as much as the pandemic was a terrible, terrible situation, I feel like it was a blessing in disguise for me personally. I can't speak on anyone else, but the idea of us going completely virtual and teaching really showed that I didn't want to be a teacher anymore, and then helped the situation of figuring out what I wanted to do next. And I'm not saying that that's exactly what I want to do the rest of my life. I'm constantly evolving in my business, but I think if anyone ever wants to pivot, you just slowly pivot. So I went from teaching science to selling artwork, and then knowing that, yes, I'm a good photographer, so what can I do next? So I can help businesses, so I'm taking their pictures, and then, oh, I'm really good at talking to people, so I could do the marketing aspect. So just constantly pivoting within my own business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what you said resonates with me because I myself say it a lot, which is we evolve as humans. So the career path that we choose for ourselves, in this moment or whenever the time might come up, may not be the one that we stick with. So, particularly when I work with my coaching clients, what I love to do is, to your point about teaching them how to understand, how to identify the thing that you want to do that's going to make you fulfilled, not just because it pays well or because you think it's the cool thing to do these days, but really to identify what it is that they want to be doing and be able to have those skills for a lifetime, because you're going to change and your passions and your strengths are going to evolve. And just what you want to do in your life is going to evolve, but always having those skills, like you said, to use those pegs and to understand, what it is that you can move into next based on your journey to date, I think is a key skill to have, because when that comes up, to your point about like, oh, I don't want to teach, but shoot, what do I want to do? That can be a little nerve-wracking, but if you know how to figure it out and you have those tools, like I said, it becomes a little less daunting, and you think, listen, I've done this before. I know how to figure it out and I can do it again.
Well, and as all good scientists say, you're a circumstance of your environment. So if your environment changes, you have two options. You stay the same and possibly not survive, or you adapt with the change, which is based on Charles Darwin. So I still hold close to my heart my science nerdy ways. I always am still reading books on science and still love it, but it also helps me adapt as a business owner, but just a woman in general, because Charles Darwin always talked about the evolution of man, but never talked about the evolution of woman, because they didn't believe that women really had priority. So understanding the ideas through a men's eye is not easy. So we're developing our own pathway, and everyone knows women are the greatest species on earth. So
100%. Yes. Oh, I love it. And we could go on about that, couldn't we? All right. Awesome. So let's go into what you do now. I mean, I know you kind of touched on it, but it sounds like, you're running and operating your own business. So when I think about connecting the dots about what you've shared so far and understanding that you were self-taught, it sounds like the way to really connect these dots between teaching and photography is you really kind of made your own space by establishing your own business. Is that right?
Yes. So the best way to explain this is everything is digital nowadays. You have all the social media platforms, which I can't even say them all off the top of my head. But what I did was I tapped into the digital marketing space, but I also tapped into the art space. So I call myself a photo marketer, visual storyteller. So I call it the cycle of marketing. So for example, if you wanted to sell this coffee cup, you would have to do three things. You have to know, why is that coffee cup important? Who would benefit from that coffee cup? And how do they know that they will benefit from that coffee cup? So the first thing is you have to take pictures of the coffee cup so people know what they look like. We are in a time period that pictures and videos are like the thing. We have to see things to actually believe them. So the next thing you have to do is you have to learn who will buy that coffee mug. So that's part of that marketing aspect of knowing your clients, but also in a real world as a consumer. Like if you go to the store, there's thousands of products to look on a shelf. Like you literally stop and think, when am I going to use this? And most people in Target put it in the cart anyways. But if you're in an actual store, you're like, okay, so how am I going to use this? I can use this here, there. Is it worth buying? And that's the third part of marketing, which is convincing the buyer that they need it, even if they don't need it. So you talk about the problem it's solving. So what I did was took the world of photography and the world of marketing and put it together. So if you search photo marketing on Pinterest, 95% of the pins are going to be mine. And I'm the only one that really talks about it on Pinterest. Now, if you put photo marketing in Google, it doesn't put the concept together because it's not a legit concept. Like, for example, a Pinterest strategist or a business marketer, like those are established things, where photo marketing is not established because it's not at least 10 years old. So it's only as old as Instagram and Facebook are, but also it's a new concept. So what I tried to do was create my own space because I wanted to stand out, but at the same time, also solve a problem. And the problem is people think that phones can solve all of their problems, which they really can't, because there's certain things that a phone can't do. A phone can't make a human connection. A phone can't give a survey and then take that data and then tell you exactly what each person in your audience wants. A phone can take a picture, but it doesn't know the angle or the aspect of the picture that's supposed to be in focus. You have to tell it that. So I think people are forgetting the human aspect of social media.
That's so interesting. And I feel like I want to talk more about that, but we would really be getting off topic if we did that. So, but I am definitely intrigued. Maybe we can chat about that another time. But that's really interesting. And I love how you created your own space, basically. I think, speaking of how strong women are, like that is the epitome. That is like, textbook example of being a badass, where, you identify something that you want to do and you look around and you say, this doesn't exist. Well, I'm going to create it. Yep. So I love it. And I also love that you speak in threes. I feel like the tips you've given so far, they're very succinct. They're very easy to follow. It's threes. I have an affinity for the number 3. And your teaching skills really come through when you break it down in a succinct way like that. So I'm noticing that, and I'm just appreciating it.
You can take the teacher out of the classroom, but you cannot take the teacher out of the teacher. Like, I always have to do that. It's just chunking. It's an idea of chunking and breaking things down so people understand. And it's something adults forget about. Like, if you sit in a boring meeting, like corporate, people always talk about you're sitting in an hour and a half meeting and they just go on and on and on. But if they have an agenda that has 3 to 5 bullet points and people are like, okay, this is the main thing I have to focus on. So I can zone out the rest of the day, but I'm going to focus on this. And a majority of the time, people that are in the meeting only have to focus on one part of that. So it's entertaining to see how the skills I use with 10 to 18-year-olds also worked with 18 to 65-year-olds.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, now that we've kind of gone through your entire journey, which has just been fascinating to hear, going back to, thinking about the teachers that are still teaching, I'm curious, again, realizing that they're up against more than they have ever been potentially. What would you say to teachers who are in a similar place that you were at, where they're maybe considering or have already decided to make a career change? Maybe they're waking up feeling the way that you were feeling in those times. What would you say to them?
So I would again go through the 3-step process. I'm going to bring it up because it's how I did it. So you have to evaluate your environment. So is there things in the environment that you can change? So for example, is it the age group of the kids that you're teaching? Is it the administration? Is it your co-teaching partner? Or what is causing that underlying? So for me, like I said, it was not having the support I needed. The second step of that is if you have changed that, or you have changed that environment and you're still feeling that way, then you need to make that ultimate decision. And that's where step 3 comes in. Do you have a backup plan? Is it just, did you just have a baby and your family circumstance has changed and you're just going through postpartum depression and you're just depressed about everything? Or is it you're depressed all the time? Is this something you need to go see a therapist or a doctor for? I'll be frank with everyone. Like, I went to see a therapist for 4 years while I was teaching. There was family stuff going on, but also being a teacher is very stressful. And I took medication and that helped, but then I was still feeling. So even if you're going to a therapist and you're taking medication, that's when you know you need to get out. I'm not telling people to go drink a lot or tell people to start using illegal drugs or try something that's totally different, but sometimes you just have to pivot, and there's that word again, pivot what you're doing. So are you spending too much time teaching and not enough on things you really, really, truly love? Or are you not focusing on the right aspect of teaching? So there was 3 years where I was struggling, and I really said, well, maybe I have to change my mindset. So you might have to hire a mindset coach. Maybe you changing careers is not for you. You are established, especially those of you that are 10, 15 years already in. You don't want to give up that track record, but you might just need to change how you think about things. Also, could be location. Studies find that people in really crowded cities are more likely to be depressed than people out, not in the middle of nowhere, but in less populated cities, because the hustle and the bustle gets them. There's a lot of things that you have to check off your list before quitting. And I did a 3-year checklist. So I took 3 years to decide I wanted to quit. So it's not something I just woke up the next morning and said, oh, well, it looks like I'm going to work and quitting today. You really have to sit down. And I also tell people, like, for me, I had a boyfriend at the time. I have a fiance now, but a boyfriend at the time. And I had to sit down with him and say, hey, like, if I quit this job and I do this, are you okay with it? Because even though it's my life, I still have to see how the people around me care about it and learn about it. So my parents were involved. My boyfriend's parents were involved. It's a heavy decision to make. Whereas if it's just you living independently and you don't live near your family anyways, you can solely make the decision. But if you have dependents like kids, or a spouse that really matters, you have to get them involved in the decision. It's not an easy decision. I will say, like, I don't regret moving out of the public education system, but I don't think I would have moved if things were different. But I can't control everything. That's the thing people don't realize, that in teaching, you can't control it. You can control your classroom to about this much. And I'm showing like a little bit, because how the kids act, how administration acts, how parents act, you can't control any of that. You can only control like 10% of your classroom. And if that 10% is stressing you out and you can't do it anymore, it may be time to move on. But I would always have a plan. Like, I took 8 months, I made a plan, I saved up money because starting my own business. Now, if you're pivoting to a new job that's going to have a salary, great. You don't have to save money and stuff, but you also want to make sure that you're not making a terrible move, that you're going to be more miserable. So you have to go through all the check boxes, I guess, or the making sure you have that checklist ready to go.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with everything you're saying. Particularly the part that stands out to me is talking through it with someone else. And I'm sure you're going to expect that I'm going to plug, a career coach, but it's everything that you said, your friends. And I always say, tap into your tribe, like, talk it through, because it may be something else that is making you feel that way, that doesn't require a shift in what you're doing for work. So I think that's really important, that, number one, you went and you addressed, the emotional part of things, and, went to see therapy and, talk through it with all the people that are important in your life. And you really did all the things to make sure that what you were doing and, the plan that you had come up with for yourself was really going to result in you being happy on the other side and not just putting you in the same position, a year or so later. So kudos to you on that for being so mindful of your journey. And here you are today.
And it's not easy. I always tell people, and a career coach was not something that I even thought about, because that was so new to me when I was starting out, because I don't think people realize how important they are. Like, I've hired a lot of different types of coaches in my lifetime, and I never regret spending any of that money. Like business coach, mindset coach, there's such thing in love coaches, relationship coach. Like, they are professionals in their field for a reason. Just like you're a professional in your field, they're a professional for a reason, because they are the unbiased mind that helps. So like, my mom said one thing, my boyfriend said another, and then his mom said another thing. So it's like, okay, well now that's not helpful at all. So you need an unbiased opinion. And especially when you talk to former teachers or current teachers, and then people who have never been in the education field, you get so much feedback that you feel overwhelmed, but it's helpful, because like when I talk to former teachers who taught 25 years and quit before retirement because they said, I just couldn't do it with these type of kids anymore, because teaching 20 years ago was totally different. But it's the same thing in any career. Like corporate 25 years ago was different than it is now. And the rules of society have changed, and the social statuses have changed. So I think what you're doing as a career coach is way more important than people realize, because you help them make a very important decision, but you're helping them weigh the options that they may not see because you're looking from the outside. So like, as a person who went from a salary that really sucked to making my own income and not having a stable income, that's a huge jump. And it's like, people are like, well, you weren't making a lot to begin with. I go, yeah, but if you're starting a business, you really don't make anything. There's nothing guaranteed in your business. And it's the same thing going from career changes. There's people that take 15, 20% pay cuts so they have less stress in their life. So money isn't the only thing you have to consider. You have to consider the whole package. And I think that's the important part of what you bring to the table that people don't realize, is you go through them and you help them. And you're kind of like a career therapist in a way, I think.
Yeah. No, you hit the nail on the head there. Well, thank you again so much for sharing. Again, I think just so many people are going to benefit from hearing your story and all the tips that you've given. I again love how you were very pointed at the tips you gave. It's going to be easy for people to understand and to follow. Speaking of follow, how can people follow or connect with you?
Well, I just went through a name change, so I'm still like blah 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 when I say it. But my business name is Chrome Photo Co. But if you look me up, I'm one of the very few Lias on Facebook, because it's spelled Lia. So if you put in my name, you'll have links to everything on Facebook. Also, you can find me on Instagram, like I said, Chrome with a C Photo Co. I'm on everything. And you can also just friend me on Facebook and send me a message. And if you are going through the same thing I went through, I can just be a lending ear. I'm not going to tell you do this, do that, but I can be there to help you and support you. And no matter what career pivot you're doing, or if you are on the fence, because sometimes you're not sure if you want to hire someone, you just need a lending ear, and that's what I'm here for. But I think the important part is people just ask for help. And so them listening to your podcast is already one step, because they know they're thinking about it. So I think it's really important that they also reach out to you and let you know, like, hey, I'm thinking about this, but I'm not sure yet. So can we jump on a call or something? So, and they can do the same thing with me. And if you want to start a product-based business, you know, a product-based photographer. So let me know.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lia. I really appreciate the time today.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciated being on.